Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Hitachi was interested in having a child. Petunia performs a bit of accidental magic. It says something about her parenting that Uchiha Itachi is considered a better prospect for raising a child. Young Hari is raised by one of the most infamous nukenin of all time and a cadre of uncles whose cumulative effect is very prominent. And someone had the bright idea to bring him back to England. Merlin helps them all. Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel, and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard. Chapter 61, Cat and Snake. Professor McGonagall was not thrilled with her attire as she prepared to teach her first class since her transformation. It was less revealing than just the bra and panties, but she had been unable to get Headmaster Dumbledore to explain where he'd gotten the outfit, which consisted of a man's button-down white shirt with several buttons undone, though to be fair, that was necessary because of the size of her bust, a short and very tight skirt, thigh-high stockings whose tops were just barely covered by her skirt, and her damned heels. On the upside, she got to have her hair in her preferred severe bun. The fact that she was teaching the 7th year NEWT class, and Tam Weasley was not pleasant. A bunch of hormonal boys was not going to be fun, and that didn't address the strangeness of having a 12-year-old holding her own in the class. How that had happened was something that no one was willing to explain to her. She had just walked into the room and was getting ready to start the lesson when her ears, her new ones, not the ones on the sides of her head, twitched as they picked up a murmured discussion at the back of the room. "Who's the hot bird?" asked one boy. "No idea, wish the old fart had introduced her at lunch," hissed back another. "Damn sight more attractive than old McGonagall though, ain't she?" "Isn't anything?" interjected a third. "This one tops Sinestra though." Tam watched as Professor McGonagall's eyes narrowed and tiny claws slipped from her nail beds. It was uncanny just how much she looked like she had 40 years ago. She'd swear not a day had passed since they were in 6th year. And that face was the one that meant she was getting very close to her limit of patience. Tam also had excellent hearing and could make out what was being said in the back rows. "I wish she topped Sinestra. You and me both. Hey guys? How big do you reckon those are?" "Guys? In my professional opinion, really nice." "Guys?" Tam dropped her ballpoint pen on the ground and ducked under her desk, absently transfiguring it into a concrete bunker which might be more difficult to retransmute in anger. She then started conjuring steel rebar to act as reinforcement. "Think she'd be interested in a little after-hours study?" "Of course she would, she's dressed like a slutty teacher." Tam whimpered behind her defenses and began to conjure more material to absorb the incoming attacks. She had to keep shoving some of the other students away when they tried to join her lessons with Professor Potter meant that most people in the upper years had a well-developed sense of self-preservation and awareness. The lot at the back of the class were apparently blinded by boobs. When she found that there was something of a rush on her area, she began to transfigure the nearby desks to expand her network so that the rest of the class could also cower out of the line of fire, although they had yet to take the added precaution of lying flat on the ground. Tam waited for the noise to die down before she poked her head out of cover, after using conjured mirrors to look beyond the confines of the magically created walls. It was an impressive level of damage that had been dealt out. Much of the back of the room had been transfigured into animals that were enthusiastically mauling the surprised males who were bereft of wands and trying to flee for their lives. The pair of fully formed lions were especially impressive. "Class dismissed, Naya," snapped Professor McGonagall. As the students shuffled out, aside from the boys who were working to fend off their attackers by shoving one another to the forefront, she spoke again. "Miss Weasley." Tam froze, halfway out the door. "Good work on your bunker earlier." "I'm impressed, Naya." "And good work, protecting your fellow students from the crossfire." "It was nothing, Manickety." A pause. "Oh shit." Minerva's eyes went wide as she watched Tam Weasley flee down the hall, as though the hounds of hell were after her. No one called her that. Well, excepting one person. Her eyes narrowed instead as she went to have words with the headmaster. Headmaster. Dumbledore looked up as his office door slammed open, and a rather fit young woman with flashing green eyes and cat ears back against her skull stormed in, her lips curled back, revealing delicate fangs. Tell me about Tam Weasley. Well, if you're asking in an official capacity, then I must insist that you remember that her legal name is Ginevra Weasley. Tam is a middle name she uses for other purposes. There was just no way I was dealing with the paperwork to fix that kind of thing. This is not an official inquiry. Oh. Then I have nothing to say on the matter. It's lovely to see you, Minerva. Don't you try that bullshit on me, Albus. I was just teaching my NEWT class. Dismissed early, I hear. And Miss Weasley called me a name that only one person has ever used. She frowned. Not for a long time, too. How interesting. And I'm positive that person never mentioned the name. It's not the kind of thing that comes up in casual conversation. And even if it did, the Weasleys are not exactly the type who would have heard such conversation. Dumbledore decided not to bother her with a response and pulled out some paperwork to fill out. So, I want an explanation, Albus. No one should know that name. She glared when he just continued with his labors. You know it broke my heart, Albus. I need to know what's going on. When there was no response, she tried not to reflect on paths not taken as she had when she'd been in here years ago. And many times since then. If you won't tell me, then. She turned and stormed back out. It's good to see you, Minerva, she heard behind her. It's amazing, you look just like you did when you were finishing your time as a student here. She froze for a moment and then walked onwards. Harry? Pansy had decided to ask about something that had been bothering her for several minutes. Moreover, no one else seemed to be interested in asking, and so it was falling to her to find out. Yes? Harry was eating his rice remarkably slowly, carefully operating chopsticks made of some sort of metal instead of his usual wooden ones. There's something different about you. I can't quite put my finger on it, but maybe it's that your skin is fucking glowing gold? That was actually something of a gross oversimplification. Harry's skin was not glowing exactly, but there was a definite golden hue to it that actually had the appearance of lightly pebbled leather as might be found on a lizard, and when Pansy looked at him out of the corner of her eye, the gold was sometimes more of an emerald green. The entire effect was strangely subtle, a faint tinge somehow under the normal pale. Besides, there were other things to catch the eye. Harry appeared to be wearing a narrow band of kohl, and Pansy was sure that his posture was a bit different. Also there was his hair. Along the top of his head, off-center to his right, was a shock of brilliant red that turned to white at the end of his ponytail. Well, you seem to have spotted it. Harry continued eating slowly. Well. Daphne coughed. Harry, why are you gold? Experiment went right. Now I just need to relearn how to move. Is that all? Yep. Daphne turned to Pansy. See? She said with false cheer. Nothing to worry about. Pansy shook her head and looked like her hand was reaching for her gun before remembering that Harry wouldn't get hit anyway and gritted her teeth. Right. Nothing to worry about. Tam swallowed nervously and knocked on the door. There were so many ways this meeting could go, and she had reviewed them over and over in her head, working out how to avoid getting caught after that slip-up in class. It was just too easy for her to forget that it had been 50 years for her. Enter. The voice was different than she had in the memories of Ginny Weasley, but in her own memories, it sounded exactly the same. Inside the office, Professor McGonagall was sitting at her desk with 2 pieces of parchment in front of her, and an expression of predatory intent on her face. Sit, Naya. And looking so very same, and yet, she would never have dressed like that. Tam sat. What seems to be the problem, Professor McGonagall? She was glad of her occlumency shields because there was a prodding at her mind from the allure. It was hard enough not to stare without that. There was a flicker of emotion that faded. Miss Weasley, you turned in a most remarkable piece of homework recently. I'm sure whatever it was I did correctly, Professor. Tam wondered what homework could have prompted a meeting. She was Tam Riddle and her work was exemplary. She was top of the class because she would accept nothing less. Even Hermione didn't have a competitive streak this severe. My face is up here, Miss Weasley. Naya. They're rather attention-grabbing, Professor McGonagall. Tam pulled her gaze away from the truly massive rack and up at the pretty face of the young-faced McGonagall. Thank you. The thing about the homework is that I found it rather familiar, and so I looked back through the archives and found that Professor Dumbledore once graded a similar paper, Naya. Tam's face was suddenly expressionless. Really? Yes. By Tom Riddle. Tam stayed poker-faced. By similar I mean to say identical. Naya. I hate to admit it, Professor, but I had Fred and George help me by stealing an old essay. I just didn't feel like doing the work. Tam lied with the ease of being Lord Voldemort in another life. No one had suspected him except for Dumbledore. The silver tongue still came easily to her. The thing is, Riddle, that the handwriting is identical, Naya. Well, I did use a duplication charm on it. Tam hadn't seen that coming. She had genuinely expected that her handwriting would be different. This was going south quickly. Without accessing the file too, Naya. I did check when it was last retrieved. Perhaps it was parallel development? Tam offered, wondering if she dared memory charm Minerva. She couldn't though. Not her. There'd been enough damage done. I see. Naya. McGonagall's youthful face had a scowl on it that Tam found endearingly familiar. Dismissed. Tam rose and walked to the door. As she stepped out, she turned back for a moment. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. She'd made it about a dozen feet outside, replaying the conversation in her head when she froze. Shit. Well played, Minnie Kitty. Albus. Professor McGonagall's snarling face appeared around the stack of paperwork that Dumbledore was working on. We have a problem. We do indeed, Minerva. Do you realize how much we're spending in potions these days? I'm going to need to raise the prices for those who can afford it to keep us stocked. Tom Riddle is wandering around the castle. Oh, that. You knew? Well, she did come to me straight after it happened. Dumbledore pushed some paperwork aside and motioned for McGonagall to sit down on a chair. Why didn't you tell anyone? She demanded. Why didn't you tell me? You know I would want to know. For one thing, it wasn't important for you to know. Ginny Weasley got possessed by a dark artifact towards the end of last year, and Miss Riddle is the result of it. Why haven't you done anything about it? About what? Miss Weasley isn't in there being controlled or anything. Young Miss Riddle seems to have gained a better understanding of how to function in society. And I did make it an executable offense to be Lord Voldemort in my school. I will say that being exposed to a loving family will no doubt have wondrous curative effects over time. Nothing can redeem Tom Riddle. She turned and stormed out of the room. Outtake. The next morning there was a good deal of whispering going on in the Great Hall as people took note of the vastly shrunken contingent in green. And of the new wearers of the color. Hermione Granger and Harry Potter were both clad in green and silver ties, and being frog-marched by a boy in a cloak with red clouds on it who was looking around the room with a single red eye. Before anyone asks, said Harry. Yes, it's magical pink eye. There was no reaction. Finally, someone spoke. That doesn't exist. Really? Harry cocked his head. Oh. In that case it's an eye that lets me control your mind. Bullshit, called someone from Hufflepuff. Believe what you want. Harry forced the two onto the bench for Slytherin after using a foot to give Draco Malfoy a kick to the side that sent him skidding along the wood, leaving scorch marks in his wake and shoving a fifth year off the bench at the end. "When my father hears about this," began the boy, "I won't give a fuck. Now shut up, or I'll pull your tongue out through your anus." Harry was not in a good mood after discovering that the people he'd already trained were so incredulous that he'd spent the night making them damn sure that wandless magic was, in fact, a thing. He'd probably be back to his usual self sooner or later, but he was also annoyed to find out that his idiot other self had taken divination and magical creatures, as those were even useful for anything. Sit. Eat. Shut up, he ordered his captive pupils. Snape looked up into the red gaze of the monster they'd hired. "Other Professor Snape, I need to speak with you about a class schedule change for your new house member." Chapter 62, Tam's Tribulations. In which a prank is played. "What's wrong, Tam?" Daphne had looked up from her frustrated attempts to get a book to turn into a lump of coal without using the fireplace in time to see Tam come in with more open emotion on her face than she could recall ever being there. "Nothing." Tam's voice was even more toneless than usual, almost evasive instead of merely guarded. "Bullshit." Tracy had spotted the exchange and decided to weigh in. "Then let me rephrase." Tam's voice was now cold, and there was an almost hollow, metallic quality to it. "Fuck off." For the first time, the common room wasn't only slightly wary of Tam, but was in a state of pants-shitting terror. Her red eyes were suddenly horrifying, and the fact that the dark voice had come out of a fresh-faced 12-year-old didn't help them calm. "Would you please keep it down?" snapped Harry, who was sitting in the corner that was still decorated by his rune networks. Over the last few hours, the various colors and patterns of his skin had faded almost completely so that it was barely visible, although the kohl around his eyes had stayed, as had his new, slightly changed posture. Also, his hair still had the shock of red to white going through it. A single pebble was whirling around him in an unsteady orbit, and had begun to glow from air friction. His skull was far more terrifying than Tam at the moment because no matter how scary Tam might be, Harry was a known horror, and they were pretty sure that Tam would never manage to be worse than that. Tam smiled thinly and stormed up to her room. As a second year, she still had a private room. She intended to politely explain to Dumbledore that anyone who tried anything on her in a private room later on would deserve whatever she did, reformed or not, and therefore she would not be sharing. Once Tam was gone, and several people had also left, walking awkwardly. Draco Malfoy wasn't among them. Hermione turned to Harry. "What are you doing anyway?" Harry didn't answer aside from glaring at the white circle wobbling around him. "Okay then." She paused. "Do you have a wand you want me to hit you with?" The pebble melted a hole in the ceiling as Harry started to laugh. "I'm working on my control." "You're what?" Hermione was using Daphne's toneless question technique. Then she remembered whom she was dealing with. "Why are you working on your control?" "It seems to have slipped recently." Harry pulled a pebble from his pocket with ostentatious care and set it to orbiting him. "I wasn't trying to make a stone-melting weapon." He stopped. "Although the fact that I can is definitely an interesting one that I shall keep in mind for future use." "Is that why it's wobbling?" "Pretty much." Hermione stared up at the ceiling in thought. "At the risk of asking a silly question," said Pansy, looking up from her book. "Does its slipping have anything to do with your makeover?" "Why would you think that?" asked Blaise. Just guessing that the two might be linked. She stopped talking as a thought occurred to her. "Oh no." And on that note, Daphne said brightly, "I'm declaring this discussion ended." The upper years were busily studying a book a Muggleborn had brought in about SWAT tactics and hadn't been listening since Tam left the room, and so didn't object. The younger students had learned that the word of Hurry's circle was law. Normally Daphne was the only one to bother actually trying to keep things organized. And these days, Tracy and Millie seemed to be up to something. Speaking of which, Tracy came barreling into the room with a sheaf of lined notebook paper and another of what looked like pencil sketches. She came to a screeching halt in front of Harry, and stepped back until the heat from the new orbiting rock was no longer quite so intense. Harry, is there any chance that I can get you to do some rune designs for me? For pay. Harry, whose eyes had been staring straight ahead, blinked. For pay. No. I will take 10%. 7. 15. Harry? Whispered Daphne, you're supposed to lower the number you say during negotiations, and I really need to know what this is about at some point. Not how my uncles taught me. 15. He grinned. Or do you think someone else can do what you want to do? 15 it is. Good, write up the proposal, and send it to this address. He handed her a small card with an address on it. You'll need to provide the actual prototypes, of course. He rose. Of course I'll just need a place to put that series of expiry, he trailed off. Son of a bitch. There was a sound of leather on leather, and then a pile of rubble formed from part of a common room wall from which Harry began to extract himself. Tracy, what is Harry doing for you? Daphne asked. You don't want to know, Daph. Trust me on this. If it involves Harry, you might be right. No one will die though, right? Nah. Harry had, meanwhile, slowly made his way out of the common room, muttering about how he could have missed so obvious a location. Tam coughed when Harry sat down next to her. I recognize that smell, she hissed so as not to be more overheard than usual in the great hall. Why were you in the chamber? Well, Harry was picking his way through a breakfast of rice and cold fish. It's a huge, open space made of sturdy material, and no one is using it. So I thought I might take charge of it, and have more space for things that can go boom. Besides, there's no snake down there, so it's kind of worthless right now otherwise. And other than the two of us, who else could even get there? I've been meaning to ask, how did you get down there? You don't speak Parseltongue, right? Parcel what? Harry thought for a moment. Oh, snake talking? Maybe. My uncle can. But what does that have to do with anything? It's how you get in. It is? Harry blinked at Tam. You sure? I don't remember needing it. Yes. Evidence suggests you might be wrong about this. Of course, I am. I should have known. Laws of magic don't apply to you. Well, as a rule, I'm not supposed to obey laws much of the time. It'd get in the way of my job, so why should magic be any different? Speaking of the snake, Harry went on, apparently unaware of his abrupt change in topic. Last night, Sprinkles told not Professor Werewolf about you unleashing a basilisk, and they're planning to deal with that later today. What? Well, they were talking, and he mentioned it and... How did a dog tell anyone anything? It's not like it could have been via barks. Last night wasn't a full moon even if werewolves could speak dog, which they can't. Humans speak English just fine, right? Well, Sprinkles is a not animal who is also supposedly your former right hand, only he's really just a pussy. You mean to say you had Sirius Black on a leash? I had Sprinkles on a leash. Sirius Black is just some guy Sprinkles turns into sometimes, replied Harry primly. We need to deal with this. Deal with this? Confound and then modify their memories. Oh. All right. They're not yet coming down for breakfast anyways. Oh wait, not Professor is, but Sprinkles is staying upstairs. Let's go. Remus Lupin had just turned the corner, exiting the teacher's wing, when the world went dark for him. That's both their memories modified, Tam said. You're really good at that, Harry mused. Legilimency helps. Oh yeah. I need to work on that some more. I don't even want to know why this is something you're spending time on. Reading minds can be useful? Fair enough. Anyways, now that we've done that. Harry waved hand and clothes tore themselves from the sleeping figures and scattered themselves in tatters around the room. Let's get to work. He began to arrange the two nude men on the bed and occasionally stepped back to view the scene, and then make a few adjustments until he was satisfied that they were positioned properly. "What are you doing?" "What Uncle Toby taught me should be done." Harry pulled a few bottles of whiskey from somewhere and began to splash the bedding liberally with it, as well as the faces of the sleeping men, swishing a bit in their mouths for full effect. "Go get a camera. We might one day wish to blackmail these two." "Go on," he prodded when Tam stayed put. "Get a camera. I'll finish up here." Tam took one more wide-eyed glance at the way Harry was now moving furniture and doing careful damage to maximize the impression made. Classes were cancelled later that day due to severe damage to the eardrums of nearly every occupant of the castle. Aside from Harry, only Daphne Greengrass was still able to hear, and so the hospital wing was kept busy with repair work. The source of the twins' screams of shock and terror were never announced. "It has to be a prank, Mooney," insisted Sirius. "There is just no way that we'd have done anything like that." "Am I the only one who noticed the number of whiskey bottles lying around the bed, Sprinkles? We could have been so blind drunk that you thought I was Lucinda Fanskradel. But really, even blind drunk, I'd have never let anything be up my ass." "Speaking of Lucinda," murmured Lupin. "If I recall correctly, you did mention something about that after." "You remember her, right?" demanded Sirius. "If a girl like that asks to shove a finger up your bum, you ask her if she's sure she only wants to use one. I mean, damn. Still, you did. You, my friend, could not pass for her even if I were drunk. You don't have the right equipment." Sirius made grasping gestures in front of his chest. "And unless you are very, very tiny, you could not possibly be as small as her finger was." Lupin gave his friend a huge grin. "You'd know the difference. It'd be like a Thestral had been back there." "Thanks, Mooney. I needed that image." "Any time, Sprinkles. But that only goes to show that it can't have been real. I mean, I know magic helps us heal, but I don't think it would have been that fast. I mean, Jackie Appleton didn't recover for a week after I had a shot at her. You and the rest of the school, mate. Even you, Mooney?" "Yeah. She liked the danger. And well, you know something, I don't want to know how you plan to finish that statement. Probably for the best. Nevertheless, I think I'm swearing off the booze for the moment. While you do that, I'm going to Madame Broth's house of good repute to feel excessively manly and straight for a while. Then you'll want to avoid Lady Poison, Sprinkles. The one with the massive knockers?" "Yep." "Why? Trust me on this, Sprinkles. Equals outtake equals. Potter." Professor Babbling looked very confused to see Harry Potter sitting next to Hermione in her class. "What are you doing here?" Harry glanced at the dark-haired boy on his other side. "I'm transferring in," he said. "I thought it would be good to learn about runes." The professor stared at him for a moment and then shrugged. It wasn't like Harry Potter ever really got in trouble for some of the crazier shit he pulled, so why should she argue if he was doing something that made sense to her for once? It was probably easier to leave it be anyway. As class went on, she kept staring at the other new student in her class. He was supposedly Potter's new bodyguard, but the boy didn't look any older than his charge. There was something really disconcerting about that. Also, he didn't seem to be paying much attention to the class. She guessed that shouldn't surprise her, but the fact that he had out some sort of knot quill and not parchment and was busily scribbling something that had the occasional Egyptian rune in it was getting to her because she couldn't tell what the rest of the symbols were. She resolved to ask him about that after class. When class ended, she went to ask the boy what it was he'd been writing, only to notice that he had vanished along with Potter and Granger. At least she knew that Granger was gone because she was using a time turner, and wasn't that a crazy use of runes, but Potter was a bit stranger. "How did you get here?" hissed Hermione to the boy who had kidnapped her and her best friend from their house as they stepped into arithmancy. "Walked." Harry didn't understand why she had trouble with this. It was only the other side of the castle and hardly much of a run for him through secret passages. We went through time. She kept her voice low, and Harry was looking a little unwell. Apparently magical time travel counted as magical travel to his stomach. I walked fast. Gah. Gah. Hi Daphne, Pansy, Tracy, Harry greeted his friends who glared at him in confused condemnation. Harry, come sit with our friends. He forced the boy, and Hermione by extension, to sit with the other Slytherins. Now say hello to the professor. Chapter 63, Revenge is a dish best served in skimpy lingerie. Or dear Merlin my eyes. The following months were comparatively quiet for the third-year Slytherins. Of course, they were in close proximity to Harry, so that was a relative description. Blaise had finally begun the sleepless portion of his training, having been long since left in the dust by Tam, who spent the evenings trying to understand how Harry had managed to create the rune schema he kept giving her to help him evaluate. He felt it was lucky that Harry had this distraction, as it would otherwise have involved him being in a great deal more discomfort instead of being forced to meditate and then try to levitate a pebble. Harry's magical control was slowly returning, but there was a period during February of almost a week during which Flitwick didn't just assume Harry had done whatever it was that the class was covering. That was, admittedly, countered to a degree by Harry's complete overcompletion of the task at hand. When they did a review of levitation, Harry put a hole through the ceiling and all the way out the roof. 4 floors up. With the feather. It took him as long as it did to begin regaining proper control because he had prioritized restoration of his motor skills. Professor Headmaster had sent him a short note saying that while he did not care what it was that Harry had done to himself to result in holes in his castle's walls, he should please stop doing it. He was now walking normally and had begun to use wooden chopsticks instead of reinforced metal ones. Most of the school was already used to him vanishing for days at a time, and then turning up for a meal without apparently noticing that time had passed. This was judging from him picking up conversations that had been going on when he disappeared. Even Remus Lupin was slowly coming to terms with the fact that Professor Dumbledore was okay with this despite no explanation being made available when he asked the man about it. Lupin was also dealing with Snape. It seemed that revenge was the order of the day after day, and so he found himself regularly receiving frilly panties and other things that the dungeon bet made clear a proper woman should have. And then there were the sex toys. So many of them. The only comfort there was that he got to imagine the awkwardness of Severus Snape in a sex shop where, no doubt, everyone's libido died a terrible death. On the other hand, Sirius couldn't stop laughing every time Snape's owl landed in Lupin's quarters with another package. There was also the continually growing pile of lingerie from students that Lupin was desperately trying to figure out how to get rid of permanently. He had taken to vanishing the stuff, but he kept worrying that someone would report this and Aurors would kick down his door and do bad things to him. It didn't help that Sirius didn't seem to see the problem with this situation, at least as far as the 7th years were concerned, although he did offer the possibility that this was a separate, elaborate prank which Lupin was sorely hoping for at this point. The only child of the Marauders continued to baffle him by simply ignoring convention when it didn't suit him. None of the Marauders had ever managed to get away with that, but Harry somehow regularly left the school for a day or more to go on some sort of unspecified trip, and no one seemed to care. For that matter, the boy's teaching technique was pretty terrifying too. Every time he came back from his rabbit issue, as Sirius used to call it, he had to find that the house elves were finishing cleaning up various humors from his classroom. His students worried him too, especially the oldest and youngest. The NEWT students were often eager to get into law enforcement or other lethal careers, and the first years were far too malleable to be allowed near Harry Potter. In the meantime, he was going to do something about Severus. Severus Snape had his wand out when he entered his chambers, having already detected that someone was in them who wasn't supposed to be. He nearly vomited when he discovered on his couch the form of Remus Lupin in a pose last seen in Muggle smut magazines and wearing some definitely frilly bits of lace. "What in the flying fuck are you doing here, Lupin?" "Well," said Remus in falsetto, and a demure look down, "I thought with all the things you'd sent me that you wanted me to wear them for you." He pressed his wrists together in a manner that would have had delightful effect should he have been female. Do you like it? How did you possibly? What gave you that impression? Snape was paler than usual. This was insane even by the standard of Hogwarts, even by the standard of Harry Potter and Hogwarts. Well, why else would you send me these? Lupin picked at the string thong. I mean, what purpose is there in sending me such pretty things? He paused. I feel pretty wearing this. What? You know my inner wolf likes you, Severus, Remus went on. You're its mate. I'm what? Don't worry, I'll make sure it doesn't hurt too much. Snape's wand snapped down and held Remus under a mildly illegal pain curse. But darling, we don't have a safe word yet. Snape's eyes widened and he turned and fled. After a moment, Lupin fell off the couch laughing. It had been so worth dressing up like this in order to see Snape's face. He was going to have that image made into a wizarding photo and give a copy to Sirius. Werewolf mates, that was absurd. By the time March rolled around, Remus Lupin was no longer receiving gifts from Snape. He had also put the picture of Snape up in his classroom where it was suitably horrified whenever he entered the room. Totally worth it. Especially when it was trying to claw its eyes out. He strongly suspected that Sirius had pranked the picture somehow to let it do that, but it amused him anyway. Professor McGonagall was also adapting to her new reality in a slow way. Coming to accept it would be a more realistic way to describe it. Her classes, third year and up, seemed to either pay rapt attention to her or be impossibly distracted. She'd taken to hexing those that seemed not to be listening, and so far it was having some small results, but she chose to take the good with the bad and enjoy that many of her students were now paying more attention. She was especially glad that they did so when she was giving the safety instructions. That was another nice thing. Her most inattentive students tended to hurt themselves with badly applied magic, so that was another upside. On the other hand, there was nothing she could do about Riddle. She was as coldly distant as she could be without drawing too much attention to the matter. She was certain that Dumbledore wouldn't back her up if she went to the Aurors, and that might not have stopped her if it weren't so hard to actually prove that it was Riddle. And then she would need to explain who Riddle was and how she knew. She didn't want to have that become widely known either. Bad enough that it had happened, but to have people know, and now that she looked like she did then. She kept catching the girl watching her without any feeling on her face. It didn't help that Riddle was genuinely brilliant. Whether it was related to spending time with that menace Potter or not, she was discovering more and more that the mind of Riddle was incredible and was being forced to consider things from new angles. How much good could he have done if he weren't an unfeeling monster? She'd tried to convince Dumbledore that Riddle had to go and had been rebuffed. The statement that Riddle had reformed was given without supporting reasons, and she was truly at a loss for why Dumbledore was allowing that thing to wander the castle, although the fact that he spent so much time in the company of the most dangerous person on staff was a mildly mitigating factor. McGonagall had even threatened to leave and Dumbledore had laughed in her face, and then reminded her of her contract. It was utterly infuriating too, that she was once again in possession of a massive chest. She had gone out of her way to get that shrunk down as the side effect of a ritual. After all that effort, to have them back to the size they'd been was just rubbing salt in the wound, reminding her of, that was the point in her thinking that she generally went and downed a bottle of scotch in her chambers. Even during the day. Hermione had stormed over to the Harry section of the common room, which was now filled with a new layer of scribbles over his previous project. Yes? Harry didn't look up from the book he was writing in. Is that a library book? Yes. You're writing in it. She snapped. It's wrong, he said. So, I figured I'd fix the math errors in the arithmancy tables. You shouldn't be writing in library books. She paused. Actually, you should be under attack by the book, come to think of it. Madame Pants enchanted the books to hurt people who write in them. The book twitched in Harry's grip as he crossed out a line. Are you pinning that book down while you write in it? Yes, Hermione. Is there something you wanted? Gah. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. At one time, she'd have chewed her lip to try and get some focus, but thanks to the boy in front of her, she couldn't give in to that nervous habit anymore. She rather liked having her face unperforated. Actually, it's the beginning of June. I've waited 6 months now. Why haven't you thanked me for your Christmas present? Thanked you for your what? Harry blinked. Is that what the packages in my room are? Draco Malfoy was already safely hidden behind Crabbe when the book went flying, and so it slammed into the chair he'd been sitting in. I haven't actually been in my room recently. Harry trailed off. Hermione's mouth opened. Then it closed. She scowled, shaking her head and clearly trying to adjust once more to the world of Harry Potter. You haven't been in your room in 6 months? Once or twice, but I was busy. Harry. Go open your presents. I'm busy. Harry turned a struggling page and continued his vandalism. Now, Harry. Deciding that it would be less trouble to just go open them besides, he supposed he really should open them. After getting his friends things, it was only fair that he thanks them for their gifts. He considered the fact that they didn't thank him sometimes as being a minor detail. The spirit of Christmas involved being thankful or something. He hadn't been paying enough attention. He drew a kunai and speared the book through the spine, ramming the point into the stone floor. Then he rose and walked out of the common room. Hermione stared at the weakly twitching book, amazed that Harry had listened to her. Harry stared at the hall for this year. Of all things, Hermione had gotten him some basic books on runes and arithmancy, and left post-it notes in them marking the rules of magic his projects violated and asking him to please update the books. Considering that, he wondered why she was so unhappy he was fixing the book in the common room. On the other hand, Blaise had given him a tanto that turned him invisible, and according to the note, did so by being so sharp it cut light. He swapped out the tanto on his shoulder for the new one with a grin. Pansy's was a set of dress robes and included a request that if he barged into a party again, he could at least be dressed for the occasion. Millie sent 20% of her take from her summer job. Girl Toby had given him a rubber vampire mask. He thought it was sweet of her to want him to be able to look like Uncle Toby. Tracy's gift was some sort of new gun from Laszlo, which apparently he thought Harry might enjoy being the test user for. From Tam was a collection of rune schema she had never been able to test because they might be dangerous, and she figured that he seemed to be able to test unsafe runes, so he could play with them if he wanted. Lastly, Daphne had provided a collection of magical doodads for him to take apart in the hopes he might do that and not bother her. That probably hadn't worked. Outtake. In his exploration of other Hogwarts, Harry came across an odd room filled with more junk than he'd seen in the whole castle. It also made his head hurt to see a virtually infinite space stretching away from him in all directions, but there was some seriously cool stuff in there. He resolved to never tell Uncle Kakuzu about all the gems he'd spotted. He wasn't sure if he could even seal that many. And even if he could, he spent a couple hours finding out that yes, he could seal all of them. He also found an angry tiara. It kept trying to kill him until he bashed it against the wall a few times. He was going to destroy it when he realized what it looked like and decided he had a better use for it. Hey, not Tam. The GRYFF common room went tense and silent at the sound of that voice. Ginny looked up to see the red-eyed gaze of the boy who'd turned the area into a charnel house. Here. He dropped something on her head and everything went red. Then there was more red spinning in front of her. Hi, Tam. Harry. Tam looked around. This is unexpected. You have made another me? Well, I needed someone who understands the world. How did you make another me? It's not like there were spare Ginny Weasleys lying around. About that. How did you find an alternate dimension? That's new. Tam turned. Hey Fred, I think we should have a little talk. She paused. Can you get Ron and Tor? She looked at Harry again. You killed my brother? No. I defenestrated him. He didn't land properly. All my students his age would have at least survived. Tam sighed. I have some explaining to do, don't I? Chapter 64, It's Happening Again. Or the end of year 3. Mr. Potter? Professor Lupin's voice was somewhat hesitant. Part of this was because he was asking a question important to his remaining friend, part because this 13-year-old always made him nervous, and part because the boy was currently honing a very large sword at the breakfast table. Harry didn't look up from the claymore he was using as a test piece. He was quite interested in finding out how to replicate the effect of Blaze's gift, and the first step was some experimentation. Yes, not Professor Werewolf? Lupin twitched a little. I need to ask you a question. All right. Harry gave the sword one more run with the stone he'd been using, and then set that aside in exchange for a rag and some vials that, when he uncorked the first one, smelled like horrifyingly potent corrosives. Lupin felt the hairs inside his nose beginning to smolder. Well, I'm more passing a question along. Sprinkles wants to know why you returned the firebolt. Harry began to use an acid wash on the blade. No idea. He paused. I don't remember doing that. You did though. He's most upset and spending a good bit of his time at the bottom of a bottle. Pause. A bottle anyway. I don't think it's the same one unless he finally got an ever-filled enchantment laid on it. When did I return this? Well, it got back to him about a week ago now. I'm not sure, but he might be more upset that you didn't even look at it. I mean, I know the company makes sure they automatically return to the sender if unopened long enough, but that kind of hurts. Not Professor Werewolf? Interjected Hermione. Was this by any chance a Christmas present? How did you know, Miss Granger? That acid was really strong, he could now feel wax dribbling from his ears and his sinuses draining. Because it was only yesterday that Harry actually looked at those. And only because I prodded him. She shook her head. I think he's waiting to thank us until someone points out that he didn't do that either. A moment's consideration brought about the follow-up of, or he might not realize he hasn't. Definitely possible, added Tracy. The more he does with runes, the more absent-minded he seems to get about everything else. Oh. That will definitely make Sprinkles feel better about it. Sort of. I'll go get it for you. Lupin gratefully scurried away before his eyeballs could melt. I don't really need a firebolt, commented Harry. I can already make those when I want. He seemed oblivious to the shocked and horrified looks from the rest of the table at the idea that he could make the most secret broom on the market. He pulled an engraving tool from a pocket and began to etch something nearly invisibly small into the point of the weapon. 20 minutes later, Lupin came back with a long, broom-shaped package the contents of which everyone wondered about. No one was sure what could possibly be inside. Here you go. I'll let Sprinkles know you got it. Okay. Harry levitated it beside him and continued with the careful work of carving into an ancient sword appropriated from one of the suits of armor, which had been smart enough not to fight back and instead now just looked dejected, or as dejected as a suit of armor could manage. Harry? Daphne asked after finishing her breakfast. Mind if I open that and find out what it is? Sure. Harry didn't look up still as the wrapping paper was torn free, and was followed by a series of gasps. I hope you don't mind me asking, said Pansy, but how did your dog afford a very expensive broom? She stopped for a moment. And why was it drinking? Maybe it steals a lot of money? Offered Harry. How should I know? It ran away anyways. Tam covered her face with her hands. On the upside, this was easier than dealing with the continual death glare from McGonagall. Life had been easier as an evil bastard. The Slytherins returned to the common room warily. Harry hadn't been seen all day, and so they were waiting for the other shoe to drop. After several years, they worried far more when Harry wasn't in sight. Thus, it was that they returned to find that Harry's corner of insanity had been redone, so that it now was filled with little rune circles with various-sized bits of wood in them. Of all people, it was Draco Malfoy who first worked out what they were seeing. "You took it apart?" His voice cracked and went higher as he shouted, unable not to vocalize his horror. When the rest of Slytherin just looked at him, he pointed an accusatory finger in Harry's direction, and went on, "The firebolt. He took it apart." There was an expression on his face that said he couldn't understand how these people could be so plebeian that they didn't share his indignation. It was remarkable, since he had otherwise gotten pretty laid back about the whole idea of superiority, but this was apparently too close to his heart. "How else am I supposed to find out how come it's the best?" Harry asked mildly as he placed another twig into a circle and watched the resulting runes scrawl themselves on the wall beside him. "So far, it seems pretty amateur." Malfoy's pale face went red and his mouth opened, clearly about to begin a truly vitriolic rant about the matter before he stopped. "Are you going to make a better one?" His question was asked quite mildly. "It shouldn't be hard." Harry made a note on the wall. Malfoy twitched for a moment and the Slytherins began to wonder if he was about to get himself killed. "I want to invest." "Or not." "You what?" "I want to invest in your company. Your brooms are going to be huge, and I want to get in on that." "Oh." Harry didn't look up. "Sure." "Hey!" Millie and Tracy shouted. Draco ignored them. "Do you have production sorted out yet?" Nope. "Right." Malfoy thought to himself for a moment, waving Millie and Tracy into silence. "All right. When you get the broom worked out, just let me know and I'll get it sorted out." He turned to the girls. "Now stop complaining and come with me so we can get some contracts drawn up. Or do you two know about running enterprises?" While they were still stunned, he grabbed them by the wrists and began towing them from the room. "What just happened?" hissed Pansy. "Damned if I know," said Harry. "I think someone is about to make me more money." He made some more notes. For the next several weeks, Millicent, Tracy, and Malfoy were seen in each other's company, heads down and muttering and making scribbles on a piece of parchment. "I'll be back tomorrow," Harry announced at breakfast one morning. He hadn't spoken for almost a week, which had left everyone on edge. This was disturbingly unworrying after that length of time. Harry?" Hermione began, "Tonight is the full moon." Harry didn't look up from his rice. "You have classes to teach today." Harry paused for a moment. "Good point. Give me your time turner at dinner." Hermione's fork clattered onto the floor. The rest of the group stared in a mix of confusion and horror, depending on their knowledge of the subject. "That way I'll be back in time to teach and you'll never know." How did? Hermione stopped herself. "You're Harry Potter, of course you know." "Who on earth gave you a time turner?" demanded Daphne. "No one." Hermione snapped, forgetting her earlier statement. "I don't have a time turner." "I should have seen it," Daphne replied, ignoring the denial. "How else are you taking all those classes at the same time?" "Harry." Hermione hissed. "It was supposed to be a secret." Daphne huffed a little at being ignored herself. "Then maybe you should have told me?" he suggested. "Then it wouldn't be a secret. As opposed to now?" Gah. She whirled on Pansy, who was snickering. "Stop laughing. He has a good point." Daphne's voice was mild. "So, who gave you one?" "Wait. This is totally off-the-wall insane. It wasn't Harry, right? So that leaves Albus Dumbledore." "She's right, isn't she?" Pansy said. Without waiting for confirmation, she turned to Blaise. "Remember how I said the man was going mad?" "Still totally true." "You're what, 14?" pointed out Daphne. Isn't it really dangerous to travel through time at your age? Harry stood up. I'll see you tonight, and then in class. As he walked out of the Great Hall, a discussion had begun in his wake regarding the safety of time travel for pubescents. The flight to Russia was relatively peaceful. The Soviet Union had broken up several years before and some flights were being offered into the former communist regions. In this case though, Harry had decided to bypass that and stole a single-engine plane from what had been East Germany and flew it to the Russian coast of the Arctic Ocean himself, thus allowing the avoidance of customs, and he only had to evade MiGs twice, both times by using prescience to dive in such a way that they crashed long before drawing a bead on him. As he flew over a tanker, he leaned out of the cockpit and spat a fireball that exploded against the prow, blowing a massive hole into it and sending out a spray of caramelizing cola into the air. On his second flyover, he threw a kunai that skewered a Eurasian man on the deck who was struggling with another man over his shoulder. He'd been having trouble carrying the burden, but the pair of knives in his eye sockets definitely made it more difficult. Harry was impressed that the man continued to stagger forward several steps before finally collapsing. Harry landed the plane on an ice floe and climbed aboard the craft. His target lay moaning atop the dead man. He examined the mangled flesh below the knee and quickly amputated the limb, cauterizing the wound to prevent infection, and then tossed him over his own shoulder and carried him back to the plane. Delivery was remarkably easy, since he just had to drop off the unconscious man at the small base just a little way away. They were a bit surprised to see him until he showed them his card and explained that he had some hunter bird for them. "How was class?" he asked Hermione. "It was fine," she answered shortly. "Did I teach anything important?" He held out his hand and waited for her to place the time turner into it. "Something about extraction of high-value targets." "Oh good, I'm glad I kept it topical." "And so, another year of school comes to an end," Dumbledore said between bites of Lucky Charms. He was wearing a dressing gown made of something that looked like exceptionally gaudy drapes from a bordello. "I will lie and say it was a pleasure to have all of you in my castle. Except for those of you whom I hate, and unfortunately, many of you will be returning next year. Please consider a transfer before the fall. It is with some joy that I report that for a second year, several of our top students have been accepted into the Aura Corps. I can only hope that they continue to inspire the same bowel-loosening terror that last year's graduates have managed. On the other hand, it makes it hard for me to not have Professor Potter on staff. On a related note, not Professor Werewolf has turned in his resignation on the grounds that he has no wish to test the curse on the defense position. I hope I am able to find another professor to teach instead of Professor Potter." Lupin hid behind his hands at the intensity of the glares and the interested looks from those who were about to be former students. "Furthermore, the train left 10 minutes ago. You are all trespassing. Get out before I have the Aurors arrest you." He sat down and went back to his food, the professors staring at him in confusion. Dumbledore looked up from eating. "Seriously. I'm fining all of you 10 galleons for this. Now get off my property." It took several moments for it to sink in, and then the great hall emptied. "Pansy?" It took a bit of effort not to jump, but she managed it and finished putting away her school books. "Yes, Harry? Sprinkles would like to stay with you over the summer." "And how do you know that your dog wants to stay with me? Did he tell you?" "Yes," said a voice she didn't recognize. She whirled around and saw. "Holy shit, Stubby Boardman?" "Gah." The man covered his face. "I'm Sirius Black." "Ow." The last bit was because he was smacked by a newspaper. "You're Sprinkles," insisted Harry. "You're Sprinkles?" "No, I'm Padfoot." "Ow." "You licked my hand. I was a dog." "There are limited ways to comfort someone." "You're a dirty, old man." "Well, yes, but that's not why I licked your hand." "Why?" "I was the white sheep of the family. I recognized the look on your face from my own summers." "Oh. Yeah. So, here's the thing. Your parents are going to think I'm a mass-murdering right-hand dude of the dark jackass. Here's a hint, by the way, I'm innocent. But it'll be a little while before they can prove it. So, do you think they'll be okay with you hanging out with the notorious murderer and dark jackhole supporter, Sirius Black, for the summer? Because then they'll have to put up with me teaching you how to enchant your motorcycle. It must be okay if I'm doing it, you know? Pansy looked thoughtful. My bike can fly. Deal. Outtake. Dumbledore stared at nothing for a little while. He was at something of a loss about how to go about dealing with this. For one thing, no one would explain to him just what had happened. He prided himself on knowing what happened in his castle, but he was finding that since his newest hiring, he was less and less certain of that. Only 2 people seemed likely to know for sure, and one of them was somehow nowhere to be found. Ginny Weasley, who was now insisting that she be referred to as Tam, was claiming that this was some sort of side effect of the diary last year. He was positive that wasn't what had happened, but it was the best he was going to get. It also meant that there was someone touched by Tom Riddle wandering around the castle. Ordinarily, he'd have dealt with this by just arranging an accident, but so far, 3 students had died, and none of them had been the girl he wanted dead. He was pretty sure that he was going to have to go to something overt, and that would be a bit of a problem since people would be liable to comment if someone at his school died to the killing curse. And in the meantime, he was busy putting off meeting with the Weasleys until he was sure what he was going to tell them. On the other hand, the Heat easily made his payment to the mercenary who was making so much trouble for him. My brothers are being difficult, Tam said to Harry as they sat at the Slytherin table for breakfast. Oh? They were sitting with the rest of the group, most of whom were slowly coming to accept that they were not going to escape spending time with 2 Gryffindors. Something about slimy Slytherins or the like, according to Ron. The others are getting a little better. It's not helping that Dumbledore isn't on my side this time though. They'll manage. Probably. Tam shrugged. If not, I may need a place to stay over the summer. You can stay with Harry, Harry replied, drawing a squawk of fear from the boy. Boy. I'll pay you. You do realize that I might like to go home and can't because I'm already there? You'll adjust. To never going home again? Yep. Did you? Did I what? Chapter 65, He's What? Dumbledore watched the last of the children board the recalled Hogwarts Express with a certain pleasure. Another year over, another batch of youngsters certer than they were. He wished they were smarter instead. At least Severus had pretty much mellowed out finally. Now he just had to deal with the logistics of the tournament for next year. He had tried very hard to convince the powers that were that this was not a good idea, but he had been overruled on this one, and he couldn't come out and say that he feared for the lives of the competitors because Harry Potter was going to slaughter them all without giving himself the headache of explaining that Harry Potter was probably a serial murderer. He wasn't quite sure how, but apparently no one had connected Harry Potter with Professor Potter. That was probably for the best in terms of his own peace and quiet. Actually, he had a few other things to oversee. The first of which was the removal of the Dementors from his grounds. With the end of the school year, the people in charge of such matters were finally convinced that Professor Potter was no longer in danger from Sirius Black. The ministry officials were already rounding up the monsters and getting them the hell away. He was planning to put his foot down on the whole having them their thing next year though. He'd only agreed because he thought there was a credible threat to his students, not Potter, of course, whom he would have gladly watched Black attack when he thought the man was guilty, but still, and since he didn't see one anymore, he wasn't going to risk them being near those same children. Also, international incidents were a bad thing. And since if it happened on his grounds, he might have to sort it out, he was all for it being someone else's problem. Headmaster? Said the executive officer of Azkaban, dragging Dumbledore from his thoughts with a worried tone. It took him several moments to remember that the man's name was something like Smithers, but he really didn't care, and would rather get back to his wool gathering. We have a problem. Of course, we do, lad. It was so much easier to just call his former students things like that than remember them if they hadn't been remarkable enough to have something to recollect. Otherwise, you wouldn't be bothering me. What is it? We're missing 12 Dementors. You're what? It's not like they just wander off except to attack things, and Hogsmeade hasn't suffered their predations. This was exactly the kind of thing he didn't need. Bad enough that he was nearly certain Professor Potter had been using the sadness monsters for his classes, and that was probably why they were missing. Just get the ones not missing off my property before I get annoyed. Best case scenario was that Potter had found a way to kill the immortal beasts. Thankfully they were humanoid-ish, and so Hagrid wouldn't be upset, but he wasn't expecting to be that lucky. Yes, Headmaster. Hi, Dad. Harry watched in surprise as the fireball split on the Tonto in front of him and splashed against the wall in a bloom of scorching. So that works. He poked his head out from the area of invisibility. Like my new blade? Itachi stared for several moments, trying to absorb the fact that he was seeing his son's head floating in the air. Again. Blade? He asked, once he was certain this was, in fact, happening. Harry turned the weapon so the flat was facing his father. See? It cuts light. All right then. How was your year? I made lots of money as a mercenary. My new branch is going great. He considered for a moment. I may need some new employees if I get more business. There's lots of work, always a job. Itachi kept the surprise from his face. It told him a great deal about the size of the world where his son went to school. In the elemental nations, ninja could reliably count on a good bit of downtime between jobs, more as the scale of the work went up. While this was partly a function of how many ninja there were, it was also because there was only so much work to go around. Plenty of merchants needed to be escorted, but there were only a few people who could afford to hire someone to wipe out even a peasant village. There must, therefore, be a good deal more money available in this other world, and enough people that there could be jobs of that magnitude regularly requested. Anyway, I have gifts for people. Ah. Itachi. Naruto realized that the person who had ordered a pork noodles with broth in, he was trying to get people to adopt the foreign word that had been mentioned by Tucci, but it had yet to catch on. Next to him was his estranged cousin. He tried to jump back, spiraling sphere forming in his hand, when a huge hand from the person on the other side of him shoved him back into his seat. Kid, if he were going to attack you, he wouldn't have ordered lunch. Jiraiya gave the pretty waitress a wink and then turned. I'll skip the usual babble since I'm hungry. What do you want? Itachi held up the package he'd had lying against the bar. It was a boy with black hair and a shock of red, whose body was plastered in paralytic seals. Fix him. If you insist, Jiraiya said slowly. I hear that you were planning to breed him into. Where does that come from? Demanded the Uchiha. When Naruto began to whistle innocently, he glared. Never mind. I need you to make him better. Jiraiya looked over the package, now resting against the bar again. What's wrong with him, then? Puberty. I have to tell you, lad, that's normal. I am aware. Itachi's hand shot out and stopped Naruto from touching the seals. Please don't do that, he keeps trying to gouge out his own eyes when we take those off. He focused on Jiraiya. It's happening all at once, Jiraiya-sama. It had rendered him catatonic before he began his attempts at mutilation. I'll bite. How? Well. Itachi sighed and followed his son out of the room, listening to the cries of presents echoing off the walls as the boy alerted everyone to his return. Sometimes he despaired of his child ever growing up. By the time he got to the meeting room, everyone else was assembled. In spite of what might be believed, much of their time was occupied with nothing at all, since there was only so much work for a group of missing ninjas as fucked up as they were. I have presents for everyone. Harry began to hand out boxes. The first was given to his father, who opened it and found a small, flat thing with Dad written on it and a weird, rubbery, black backing. "What is this?" "Here, I'll show you." Harry took the thing and placed it against the scratched headband Itachi still wore. It stuck to the metal plate, covering it. "Well, that explains that," said Jiraiya, pointing at the thing still affixed to Itachi's headband. "Indeed." Then his son handed Uncle Toby a package, unaware of the seething glare directed at him. He also missed the twitch as Toby's hand went for a kunai for the merest fraction of a second. The clearing of Itachi's throat stopped that movement, and instead he took the gift from Hari and slowly opened it, expecting to be horrified or infuriated. "Hi," said a chipper voice from inside the box. "I'm Genius Japes, Jokes and Junks. By M. Spoon, the #1 resource for magical humor. I have over 10,000 classic jokes in me and thousands of new ones as well. I come with more than 100 great prank ideas and even include supplies. You'll be the life of the party with me by your side. You don't even need to tell the jokes in me, I'll do it for you. Rejoice in your ownership of the first, last, and only humor device you'll ever need. Remember to buy the next edition." Toby started at it. "Just name a subject and I'll pull a random joke from my collection." Toby glared. "Death. Why was the farmer afraid of the crows?" The book paused almost 2 seconds. "Because they were in a murder." Canned laughter played from the depths of the box. Thank you. There was another pause. "Wasn't that funny? How about another? Please?" Toby put the top back on the box. There was a muffled sound of pleading. "Don't ask," Itachi said when Jiraiya opened his mouth. "Brat, you had better not have gotten me another animal," snarled Kisame as he opened the present in his hands. There was a gentle fwee from inside the box. "What the fuck is this thing?" "A puffskein." "A what?" "It's a ball of fluff that a long tongue extended from the box and shoved itself up Kisame's nose." "Eat snot." Kisame blinked. "Seriously, you don't want to ask," Itachi said. "All right, but when did?" "I'm getting to that. Here you go, Aunt Conan." Hari held out her present. She accepted it warily and slowly removed the wrapping paper, obviously apprehensive, especially with pain observing over her shoulder in curiosity. She was about to open it when Hari froze and turned bright red. "No." He shouted and spat a fireball that came as such a shock it managed to set the gift on fire before Conan could dodge. Hari turned and fled the room, screaming. "What?" Conan stared at the ashes on her palms. "What just happened there?" Itachi blinked slowly. "I'll go ask my son, shall I?" Her eyes narrowed a little. "You do that." Itachi returned a few minutes later with a mildly nonplussed expression on his face. "He appears to be going through puberty." "I see," Pain said. "Unless I miss my guess, all at once." Can that happen?" "Apparently." "You're serious?" Jiraiya asked. Itachi turned his catatonic son slightly to reveal his collar. "I managed to get a few words out of him. Many of them were his horror at seeing me and Conan naked, not that I'm ever saying that to anyone. And he said that it's part of the curse mark Orochimaru tried to get to work." "Orochimaru marked your son?" "No." "Huh. Then how?" "He put it on himself. He might have stolen a prototype for a new version of the seal from Orochimaru while he was infiltrating sound." "Your son is insane?" "No, but I understand your assumption there. My guess is that Orochimaru wanted to have puberty happen all at once to reduce the amount of time that his soldiers are out of commission due to awkwardness with attraction and so on." Jiraiya nodded. "It seems plausible. He would rather traumatize someone instead of just letting things progress naturally. Anyway, my son needs to be fixed now. I've been having trouble getting food into him, and this is getting ridiculous. He needs an intensive course, please." Jiraiya raised his eyebrow. You're sure? Yeah. Jiraiya scratched his chin for a moment. On one condition, you look after Naruto for a week. He was one of the few people with clearance to know about the truth of Itachi and the massacre. Agreeable. I shall train him. Jiraiya took the still frozen Hari and tucked him under an arm, vanishing in a cloud of leaves. Itachi squinted at Naruto, who was staring in shocked confusion. Why Yuri going to train me? His voice squeaked as he asked. Yes. He cocked his head to one side. Are those my Sharingan? It could have been expected that he would worry about the safety of his brother, what with someone else having those eyes, but Sasori had current reports on Sasuke's activities that were accurate up until a day or so prior, so the odds that someone had killed his brother and taken those eyes was low. Yep. Naruto replied cheerfully. Sasuke said that since I'm an Uchiha, I should have a Sharingan. Of course. That makes perfect sense. Itachi nodded and then froze. What are you talking about? My name is Uchiha Naruto. The blonde bounced in place. Acting head of the Uchiha clan. Sasuke adopted me to reduce the level of violent, incestuous crazy in the clan. What do you mean acting head? Naruto rubbed the back of his head. Well, Sasuke is off training with Orochimaru so he can kill you Sasuke, I mean, not Orochimaru, but that means he's sort of technically a missing nin, only no one is able to declare it because that's generally the purview of the military police, and I happen to be the head of that body as the only remaining loyal Uchiha. So right now it's kind of a default thing that I'm in charge. Dear Lord, Itachi murmured. Konoha has gone insane while I've been away. This is the only plausible explanation. Oh. Well, I said I'd train you. Time for an assessment. Get into the first stance. The what? The first stance. What's that? Oh. Outtake. You know that not Professor Headmaster keeps trying to kill you? Hari asked Tam. Professor Dumbledore wouldn't do that. Snapped Hermione. She had, despite her best intentions, been listening in when Tam and Hari talked at mealtimes, because they were always discussing things so far advanced of her classes that it was rather like offering heroin to an opium addict. Of course, he would, Hari replied. He wants her dead, after all. Isn't she possessed? Asked Harry. Not really. This is Ginevra Tam Marvolo Riddle Weasley. Harry's eyes went huge and his hand had already begun to reach for his wand when Tam's finger pressed against his forehead. Aha, she cautioned quietly. It's rude to draw wands on people who haven't done anything to you. You killed my parents. Hissed Harry, who was pretty sure that while the school seemed to have mellowed since last year's Parseltongue incident, if he started insisting that Tam Weasley was possessed by the spirit of Voldemort, someone everyone else was sure was dead, they'd call him crazy hell. He was beginning to think he was a bit nuts too. And I apologized. Several times. Tam said. Besides, it wasn't me who did it. Just because I have part of a maniac's soul helping to boost my magic does not mean I'm that maniac. Hell, I'm based on the personality of that maniac at age 16. Only not as fucked up. Language. Oh shit. Hermione covered her mouth when she realized that she was telling off the Dark Lord. Relax, Hermione. Tam shook her head. Professor Headmaster, now you have me doing it too. Hari has good reason to want me dead. I am the spirit of Tom Riddle. Sort of. Only I mellowed out. Hari provided some therapy. I guess that's what to call it. You're really sorry? Harry asked. Yep. Not just about the whole dying thing. He probed. Meh. Knowing me, I wasn't going to die just because of some magical incident. I mean, you even said that the other me is still around making trouble, right? Oh. So, I'm hardly going to be upset about it. Besides, even if I were bitter, do you have any idea what would happen to me if I tried to hurt you while Hari is your guardian? Not really. Neither do I. I like it that way. Tam sighed. And when all's said and done, I have to admit that being evil was a lot of effort. Being grouchy is much less stressful. I've been doing some reading, and it seems like that's better for my health anyway. Chapter 66, How It Went. Warning, slight smut/mentions of sex stuff in this chapter. Hi Dad. Itachi didn't even blink as he flicked a fireball at Naruto to encourage more action on the part of the blonde. Naruto, on the other hand, was busy trying to recover from the shock and suddenly had to dodge the fireball coming at his face. He mostly managed it. How's he coming along? Asked Jiraiya as he observed Naruto diving for a lake that hadn't been there when he'd left. HN. Itachi glowered a little. Dad says my cousin's not doing too badly, but that he needed to learn the pussy stuff. Jiraiya blinked. The what? Basic stances, grumbled Itachi. Ooh. That explains a lot, doesn't it? Jiraiya rubbed his chin. Not much he could do to undo years of neglect, but he could persevere with teaching the brat anyway. He'd turned the boy's old man into the Hokage, so compared to that, my son seems to be working again. Yep. Jiraiya grinned hugely. Definitely one of my success stories here. I'm proud to have such a skilled student. I am unsure if that's a good thing. It will be. Jiraiya's expression was one of great perversion. Itachi rubbed his face and then examined his son. There was certainly no catatonic state anymore and no blushing either. On the other hand, there was something different in how he stood. Slightly calmer maybe? More like an adult? Then he remembered that his son was more than able to fake maturity for days at a time, especially when up to something, and relaxed a little. In that case, Lord Jiraiya, I will be taking Hari. Not a problem, kiddo. Jiraiya clapped Hari on the shoulder. Well, clapped the air above his shoulders so as to not cause him to dodge. Go forth and do me proud. I think I'll do girls, pervert sage. Itachi sighed. So how were things with my cousin? Asked Hari as they headed back towards rain. They were. You need the talk. Naruto stated as soon as Jiraiya was out of sight. I what? The talk. Someone needs to explain to you the facts of life. Itachi blinked. Especially how it's not okay that your parents forced you to have sex with your sister. Wait, what? I know they were your parents and all, but obviously they weren't very good ones if they'd abuse you and your sister that way. I mean, even the orphanage attendants weren't that bad. All they did was make me sit in a corner a lot and stuff. So, your parents must have been really shitty. Itachi blinked again. Apparently, the world had gone insane. So, I know that you're in denial, but the first step in getting better is to admit the problem. That's why we're going to break through those barriers, so you can face your memories. What are you talking about? I don't even have a sister. The damage is pretty extensive, I see. Well, maybe we can start on something simple. Even if your parents did it to you, it's still not okay to make your son have sex with your sister. Telling him that she's his aunt doesn't make it okay. Itachi rubbed the bridge of his nose. I have to know, how did you come to the conclusion that I plan to have Hari sleep with Conan? For one thing, he thinks she's pretty. Do you want to sleep with everyone you think is pret? Itachi stopped. You're what, 14 or so? Of course you do. I withdraw the question. And for another, he knows what she looks like naked. He knows what everyone looks like naked. Naruto's look of disgust was enough that Itachi decided to begin some intensive training via the application of a grand fireball. It went. Training with the pervert was interesting. Hari was completely immobile for the first day as Jiraiya both plied women of easy virtue and paid them to ply Hari. During the second day, Jiraiya began the lessons. It was remarkable to hear the variety of sounds a human could make without using a kunai. So, you have the Byakugan, kid? No. Wasn't a question. I don't have it. I'm going to pretend you're not lying to me and move on to where I was going with this. You have an unprecedented ability to understand my teachings. I want you to watch carefully what I do. Most people would have found it disconcerting that this discussion was going on while the man was fingering a prostitute, but Hari had spent 2 days in the company of Jiraiya while in a brothel. I expect you to ace the test I have waiting for you at the end of the week. He pointed at the prostitute sitting on the futon in front of Hari. Do as I do. Do you ever get tired, kid? Nope. Did you get tired before the Sage Chakra? Some. Do you mind? Demanded the prostitute Hari was working on. He was doing nicely until you spoke up. He's got to learn how to work with distractions, Yuki-hime. Jiraiya gave her a smile and picked up the woman beside him. Do you know even I have never been asked to leave 3 brothels in a week because of tiring out everyone there? Is that good, pervert sage? I really wish I'd never told you that nickname. But it's so fitting. All the same. Is it good? The name? No. Being asked to leave? Sort of. So, what's this test you have for me, pervert sage? Oh, that? I've got a seduction specialist who tried to seduce me tied up. I was planning on dealing with her myself, but it'll be a good test. All right. I look forwards to seeing my training put to use. Kid, the toad sage had sat down by the side of the road on a stone that was suspiciously bench-like. It was right outside the hideout he'd been using to keep his most recent captive hidden. He was currently taking great pulls out of a jug of sake and intermixing that with scrubbing his hand down his face and rubbing his eyes, trying to get the world to come into focus. So far, the alcohol was mostly giving him a mild buzz, and he was trying to work out where he'd gone wrong in his life aside from being a boozing, womanizing old lek. Yes, pervert? Kid, you're not supposed to actually end up with her unconscious 4 times. But how else was I supposed to finish the exercise? Jiraiya sighed. If you don't need the full set of steps, there's no reason to use them. Oh. As it is, I have to hope you didn't render her completely insensate for good. As lovely a voice as she has, hearing it like this is not the point of the activity. She's supposed to be turned into an agent. Oh. Not that it wasn't impressive, mind you. Jiraiya took another long sip and tossed the clay jug to the side of the road, where it smashed. I don't know if anyone's ever managed to complete the exercise when done properly, but I think we've demonstrated why. My lord! Came a voice from inside the hideout. And as much as we were trying to encourage her to speak, this is getting silly. How do you mean interesting? Asked Hitachi as he and his son flitted through trees towards rain. Enlightening? He mentioned you might not want specifics. If you want me to give them. No. Itachi's response was loud and vehement. I think I can imagine the general idea. I doubt it, Dad. You don't read in Conan's books. Itachi nearly hit a tree when he heard that. So, brat, how was training with Hitachi? Jiraiya asked his pupil, one he hoped would someday rival the one he'd just taught. It would amuse him greatly if his student's son was more open about things than Minato had been. The only reason he didn't spy on them was because he'd known both when they were pre-teens, and having been personally involved with them made it a bit icky. On the other hand, he knew what those bruises were when Minato showed up for training, and had given his favorite student a few pointers that he had been thanked for repeatedly. He was a lot less angry than I expected. I think the trauma is deeper than I had believed. Jiraiya wasn't sure how to broach the subject that Itachi had been under orders at the time with the current acting head of the Uchiha without admitting that the village had, well, ordered the death of the entire clan. While Naruto had voiced, in his official capacity no less, unfavorable opinions about the late members of the Uchiha, there was a big difference between thinking they weren't very nice, Naruto's words, and being okay with the village actually commanding a 13-year-old member of the clan to butcher every last man, woman, and child. That was the kind of thing that could get someone upset. On the other hand, he was having a hard time with the fact that Naruto was expecting Itachi to be angry, although Jiraiya had to admit that being angry with those orders wouldn't have been irrational, but Itachi was a devout pacifist and so had taken the job of killing them all, and wasn't that a mind screw? Well, that's good. I think I started to make headway in getting him to accept what his family did to him. And that was another thing. Naruto had been insisting that Itachi had been forced to breed with a sister that Jiraiya was certain had not been alive. Either that or the Uchiha were better at stealth than both he and Danzo, because both of them should have known about a loose end like that. At the least, I'm pretty sure I convinced him not to make his son have sex with his aunt. Well, that's something, Jiraiya offered. Of all the things that kid was likely to do, fucking his favorite, and only, and wasn't likely on the list. The boy seemed pretty stable in that regard. He wondered again about the name Konan appearing in Rain, but shook it off. She and Nagato and Yahiko were dead and dwelling on the loss of every single one of his students, barring the one currently babbling about once again getting noodles with broth and made a mandatory food at all official functions in Leaf, was a good way to wreck his good mood. Hi, Aunt Konan. Hari cheerfully dodged the explosive tags that flew at him as a reaction to his greeting. Feeling better, Hari? Konan wasn't sure how to face her nephew now that he was paying attention to women. Or rather, now that he was paying attention to women and knew what she looked like naked, what she liked to read, and how she tended to read it. Yep. Hi, Uncle Pain. Did your father escort you the entire time, Hari? Nope. I was being trained by pervert sage. Who? Jiraiya. Oh. Pain paused. What? He helped me learn how to deal with seeing Aunt Konan naked all the time. Konan turned red. I even can deal with seeing you naked also. Pain scowled at the distaste Hari used in the wording. Not that he wanted to have his nephew attracted to him, but there was something insulting in how disgusted the boy sounded compared to his aunt, to whom he was apparently neutral. Did you get me any new books from him? Konan asked, still flushed. As much as she was mortified to ask her nephew, it was still Lord Jiraiya's books. I don't think he published anything while we were training. He spent a chunk of the time drinking heavily though. Oh. And he helped me pick out a good gift for a woman. Hari held out a somewhat flat box that Konan took with a degree of trepidation. What did he? She trailed off as she undid the wrapping and examined the amount of frills hidden inside. And the lack of anything else. I see. He was impressed that I could give your measurements. Hari chirped. Conan's blush deepened as she examined the numbers on the tag. But this isn't. You wear 2 sizes too small. He taught me about fitting, too. He said it's very important to wear the right size to avoid back problems from large. Hari? Did you mention that this gift was for your aunt? Asked Pain, his face covered by his hands and the beginnings of a headache afflicting his primary body, as he felt the heat coming off his best friend and second in command. No, Uncle Pain. Should I have? I think it's safe to say yes, Pain managed as Konan stomped from the room, humiliation etched into the set of her mouth. From outside was the sound of Haydn not even getting to open his mouth before being skewered and exploded out of the tower. I wish you would at least let him actually say something rude first, there's always a chance he won't. He looked at Hari's expression. A small chance, he admitted. The worst part, Konan felt, was that it did fit better. Outtake. Merry Christmas, said Hari to the Slytherins who had stayed for the holiday. That's what I'm supposed to say, right? He had a stack of presents floating behind him as he entered the common room. Yes, said Harry shortly. Aren't you supposed to say it back? Under normal circumstances, said Tam. She had opted to stay behind this year, so that she could have more time to think about how to explain this to her family. In the meantime, Hogwarts was a better place to be, even with Dumbledore trying to kill her. He'd pretty much stopped anyway, since he was getting tired of injuring or killing other students. Given what she could recall of this world's previous year, she wasn't sure why Dumbledore seemed to care about that. But you see, Harry is a bit upset. Bloody enraged. Is bloody enraged because you got Remus Lupin fired for being a werewolf? About that, Harry said. Could you explain again why he was fired? I mean, what's the big deal? Werewolves are feared and hated throughout the world because some of them are vicious murderers and the rest are uncontrollable while in their wolf form, Tam explained. But it's just like having a period. He gets achy and then angry and then achy, Harry tried. I don't think anyone was impressed by that theory, Daphne muttered from her patch of common room where she and her sister were trapped trying to levitate stones. Harry had refused to let them go until they could at least do that and had threatened to kidnap them from their beds if they went home for the holidays without permission. They were convinced he was insane enough to do it. They were right. Even so, Harry went on, everyone admitted he was taking a potion that meant he was in control as a wolf. So, he was about as dangerous then as, well, he normally is. And aren't there plenty of wizards who go around killing people all month long, not just one night in 28? Anyways, I have gifts. Packages floated over to Blaze, Daphne, Astoria, and Harry. I didn't get you anything, Tam. I figured being yourself was a good gift. Thanks, Harry. Anytime. Blaze, Daphne, and Astoria opened their gifts to find scraps of paper, and Harry was still insisting on using pulped wood instead of animal skin for some reason. Right. I'm going to go deliver gifts to everyone else. Harry exclaimed before vanishing in a cloud of fire. Was that a phoenix? Muttered Daphne. Yes, said both Tam and Harry. Harry opened his gift. What in the bloody fuck? He demanded as he drew out the sword of Gryffindor. Chapter 67, Rearming. Itachi. The man in question looked up at his leader from the current intelligence report on his brother. Sasori didn't reveal his sources, and Itachi wasn't sure he wanted to know whom was suborned and sound anyway, but apparently Orochimaru had decided to move Sasuke to an outlying base to prevent further incursions. It was a good thing Hari was supposed to be escorted places, because it occurred to him that he hadn't seen his son for a few days and that his leader was looking worried. Yes, Leader-sama? I wanted to ask you if you've seen Hari recently? Payne's voice was deceptively mild. You know something, said Itachi, I was just thinking that I haven't. But you ordered him to not leave without an escort, so I'm sure there's nothing to worry about. The last time he was out and about sans supervision, he stole Waterfall's hero water. I'm not sure that I can overstate how much trouble I don't need. With all due respect, Leader-sama, my little brother is currently back and sound, so the most likely problem to deal with will be Orochimaru angry at us again, and I doubt he wants us paying him another visit and burning down what little my son left undisturbed a second time in as many years. Joy. We'll just have one of the most dangerous, not to mention devious, men not on my payroll angry at us. I have no doubt that Snake could make our lives difficult in a myriad of ways we'd never trace back to him if we really managed to tick him off. I do not need that kind of headache, Itachi. But he would need an escort. Toby wants to know if anyone has seen Haydn, Toby said, poking his head into the room. From outside could be heard the sound of a somewhat disheartened joke book saying, "Why won't you laugh, Mr. Toby?" I told the joke about 6 orphans, a bus, and a 300-foot cliff. Toby thinks Haydn would be a good companion for Toby's gift. Hi, Dad. See? Itachi said, mildly. He's right here. Nothing to worry about. Where is that fucking brat? Haydn's voice echoed through the tower. Never mind, Toby found him. Uchiha Sasuke wasn't sure where Orochimaru got his information, but he'd heard a rumor that Sasuke's nephew was back in the elemental nations, and had decided to take preemptive measures to avoid another incident like the previous years. Sasuke's venture in hunting an A-rank bounty had been suddenly curtailed by that news, and he was instead bundled off to a secret base hidden deep in the mountains of Sea Country, far away from Rice. At the moment, he was reading a letter from the best decision he'd made in his short life. Naruto was proving to be highly amusing when given power. He had a stack of scrolls an inch thick that Kabuto had managed to get for him, detailing the effects of Naruto on Leaf. So far, it had been impressive and scary. The letter he was reading right now, though, involved his brother. Sasuke was unclear why his brother had decided to train Naruto for a week or so. There was something fishy about his nephew needing help with puberty. That story stank to high heaven. Then again, maybe Itachi needed to get him used to it before he tried to breed him? That would be like the poor man. Naruto reported that he had been unwilling to admit the possibility of trauma, but that wasn't so surprising. He hoped that his adopted clansman was right about Itachi temporarily giving a reprieve from his nephew having sex with their sister. He'd take what he could get. On the upside, Itachi hadn't ripped out Naruto's eyes. That would have been bad. And now he was understating things like Naruto. Oh well, there were worse traits to pick up from the blonde menace to sanity. He hadn't wanted his brother's eyes in his head, so it had been fortuitous that he'd adopted someone who was in need of a set of Sharingan. He ducked under a barrage of kunai and a lightning technique he didn't know the name of. Kabuto didn't mind him reading his post, but refused to allow valuable training time to go to waste. The fact that the white-haired freak wasn't present didn't matter. Sasuke had sort of become used to that method of training. Besides, he had the distinct impression that the boy would know if he didn't study thoroughly. Sasuke's Sharingan informed him he was about to be rendered unconscious. He went to dodge and his eyes went through almost a dozen iterations of possible futures as he responded to each, always ending up with blackness clouding his vision. The one he ended up taking took the longest, and involved dodging 3 times before managing to half-spin around and seeing a single red eye spinning in the dark. Fuck. Hari whistled cheerfully as he looted the hideout. There had been plenty of cool things this time, not just that boring seal like the main base in sound. And Uncle Sasuke had managed to dodge 3 times. There was a man chained up in a cell plastered with danger signs who seemed rather unhappy, and Hari considered letting him out, but the man was quite rude when he walked by, so he decided to let him find his own way out. It was interesting how he made his arms into rockets and tried to punch Hari's face. He was less impressive when clutching at the space his nose had occupied before Hari severed it. Hari trotted from the base with a set of scrolls sealed into his wrists for later examination. In the meantime, he had to return Uncle Sasuke to Leaf where he was supposed to be. Tsunade didn't look up when she sensed someone at her window. That wasn't too unusual. ANBU never seemed to grasp the idea that they didn't need to be so mysterious. Especially since they were walking up the outside of a building painted bright white. The plaster was kept in good condition and blinding to ensure that normally dressed ninja would stand out like sore thumbs. And anyone wearing a white sufficient to disperse their image against the tower would be obvious elsewhere. Of course, there were ways around it, but it would be remiss to not even try to use simple methods of preventing infiltration. "Hi, old lady." Her pencil snapped in her hand. The shards she flung at the boy sitting on her windowsill were casually dodged with more ease than anyone should have when facing a member of Konoha's sages. Then her eyes took in the sight, and she found she couldn't help it. "Why are you gold?" "Trade secret." The boy had a bundle over his shoulder that had a distinctive duck butt. "Is that Uchiha Sasuke?" "Yep." Uncle Sasuke was being silly. "Tell him he's supposed to stay, please." The boy cocked his head. "Oh wow. That's a really neat seal." He was suddenly in Tsunade's face and shifting his body to avoid her strikes as he stared and began to mutter. It was making it difficult for Tsunade, since she had to avoid hitting Sasuke while trying to ward off his nephew. "Is that why my Sharingan says you look like a really hot woman?" "Oh, nope. That's just a powerful illusion. You know you'd be more comfortable if you wore the right size." "Double J?" Tsunade screeched as she felt a pair of hands weigh her breasts with more skill than she would /ever/admit. No, double K. I know someone who could hook you up. The ANBU who were guarding the Hokage tried to intervene. The first got an Uchiha Sasuke to the chest, and the second was contemptuously dodged and flung out the open window by a kick that cracked ribs. The third was used to block a punch from the Hokage, and was dropped to the ground with massive internal trauma, while the fourth had grabbed Tsunade, and was dragging her physically from the room as she screamed bloody murder. Keep a better watch on him this time, old lady, called the boy as he jumped into the ANBU, who was re-entering the room, and found himself once again kicked. Fuck sound and the assholes of everyone there, growled Haydn as he stalked into the meeting room, an enchanted needle still sewing him back together. His arm dangled loosely at his side. If I never have to see one of Orochimaru's fucking experiments again, it will be too goddamn soon. Hi, Uncle Haydn, Hari chirped. What took you so long? I made it to Leaf and back before you got here. You were in Leaf. Payne's voice had a slightly dead quality to it. Yep. Without an escort. Uncle Haydn seemed busy with people and sound, and I didn't want to bother him while he was having fun. Fuck you. Haydn was towed out of the room, hissing and spitting, by Kakuzu. He was enjoying himself, Hari asserted. Then the reinforcements showed up. I didn't like to interfere. You were in Leaf. Without an escort. Well, my escort was busy. Losing pursuit or something, no doubt. Regardless, and I realize I seem a little fixated, I want to emphasize that you were in /Leaf without an escort /. Uncle Payne, are you feeling okay? I already said yes. Payne's eye twitched. What chaos did you sow while you were there? I just returned Uncle Sasuke. What else? The old lady who was using the Hokage's office was a little jumpy. She started screaming when I checked to make sure I'd estimated her cup size correctly. Uncle Payne, are you all right? This last part was because the Deva path had gone deathly pale, and was staring into the distance. How did you check? Well, my Byakugan was getting a bit of trouble because of her illusion, so I had to manually test. Manually test, Payne repeated, sounding far away. Using my hands. Dear gods, we're going to die. I never even got to tell her that there were some flaws in her seal array. I think she left in a part that makes her age. Out. Okay, Uncle Payne. Out. All right. Hari trotted from the room. Itachi, snarled Payne. How did this happen? Well, Leader-sama. I swear, if you tell me anything that begins with Hari and Haydn going to sound, then I'm not sure what you want to know, Leader-sama. You know something? Get out. Just go away. Hari? Itachi poked his head into his son's room. He was worried that his son was upset at Payne's tone, because he hadn't seen him for over a day. He preferred to think that it was that his son was upset and not that he had decided to take another field trip. Hitachi wasn't sure how many more trips Payne's heart could handle. Hi, Dad. Hari waved his arm at Itachi. How are you? Itachi trailed off when he realized that the arm being waved at him was not, in fact, still connected to Hari. His eyes spun into their kaleidoscopic form and whirled madly, and he was just beginning to have a panic attack when he counted and discovered his son still had the usual 2 arms coming out of shoulders. The room was strewn with scrolls and notes. Why are you holding your arm? I had to take it off to attach the new one. Itachi's mouth worked silently for almost a minute as he tried to find the words for this situation. Finally, he came up with new one? Yeah. I found some stuff in Orochimaru's base and, Dad? Itachi had the same faraway look that Payne had had the day before. I thought it would be a good project since I fixed the curse mark. Sasuke needs to stay in Leaf. I'm trying, Dad. Anyways, it reminded me of the one I took off that Danzo loser, and so I had to do a little work to implant bits of that arm into this one. See? Hari turned and rolled up his sleeve to show 8 Sharingan eyes wide open along the length of the limb. But it keeps doing this. He held up his hand, from which a bonsai tree was growing before he pulled it out. I think if I work on my chakra control a bit more, I should be able to make it work properly. Orochimaru had a whole scroll full of great technique ideas. It kind of reminds me of the first Hokage. Hari. Yeah, Dad? As your father, you know I take an interest in your personal development, right? Yeah, Dad. I'm going to make that /order/you to discuss any further improvements, alterations, modifications, and so on with me. Before you do them. Okay, Dad. Itachi sighed. With any other Uchiha, he knew that those orders would be circumvented, avoided, misinterpreted, or otherwise manipulated to disobey. With his son, sadly, he just knew that the boy would manage all of that and not realize he had done so. He brightened slightly there. Even though his son was exhibiting the arguably negative traits of the Uchiha, at least it wasn't purposely, and that counted for something, right? Hari, Someone send me Hari. Boomed Pain's voice through the tower. Guess you had best go see what Leader Sama wants. Okay, Dad. Hari hopped up and left the room, still absently holding his own severed arm. Hari, what the fuck happened to your arm? Outtake. Hey, Millie. Hari said, ducking as he appeared in her living room. He looked around in confusion and spotted his friend's mother looking at him in a mix of terror and confusion. Hello. Uchiha. Millie was not quite at the point where she was willing to admit that Hari had effectively taken over Slytherin, including the older years, and somehow decided she was a friend. I've got your Christmas present for you. Hari held out a small package. I know it's a little late, but I figured I should get it to you anyway. It's Christmas morning, Mill replied. Still. Hari looked around and frowned. Why hasn't your mother tried to kill me yet? What? Why would she do that? She frowned. See what you did? Now she's fainted in horror. Was that really necessary? Shouldn't she have been punching me or something? It's what she usually does. In what world does that happen? Mine. There wasn't much Millie could say to that one. Hello, Millie's father, Hari greeted. Instinctively, he dodged the ham-sized fist aimed at him. Do you like being flung through walls? He asked in a friendly tone. A second attempt to crush his skull was the only reply, unless the roar like an angry bull counted. I guess you do. Hari grasped the wrist that had just missed him and spun in a full circle, releasing with a hammer throw and sending the man out the closed window and bouncing down the lawn. Sorry. Hari called. Missed your wall. The man was struggling to his feet and rose just in time for his daughter to hit him in the face as she was defenestrated after her attempt to punch. Hari proved to him that she too enjoyed being able to fly under someone else's power. I hope you like your gift, Hari said as he vanished in a cloud of fire. Chapter 68, Snakes in a Joke Book. Pain pinched the bridge of his nose, something he only did when his nephew was around or being discussed. Part of this was because there were all those pointy rods that were uncomfortable, so he tried to avoid squeezing them. He had just spent the better part of an hour listening to Hari explain the general idea of why he had chopped off one of his own arms and attached one made out of what Pain was convinced were clone cells from the first Hokage, as if Leaf needed more reasons to attack them. Hari had kept growing little trees and flowers from his hand, fingers, shoulder, and so on. It was distracting. Somewhere in there had been more details than Pain had ever wanted to know about what Shimura Danzo had been up to over the years. It made him rather glad that Freak of Nature was out of the picture. The man was clearly too much of a loose cannon even for the Akatsuki. There was also the bit about excising bits of the arm that Pain was beginning to think of as senjutsu that had included several Sharingan eyes and implanting them into the new arm for reasons Pain hadn't quite followed, unless it had been because Hari wanted to see if he could always possible. It wasn't until Hari piped up with, "So why did you want to see me, Uncle Pain?" that he realized that they had been completely off the subject the entire time. I received a letter from Orochimaru. When Hari didn't respond, Pain continued. He asks that we please return his missing research and prototypes. I'm assuming the prototype is out of the question? Hari's nod was unsurprising. And while I have no doubt that we could raise all of Sound to the ground and, indeed, all of Rice Country, it would be annoying to do so just because of this. Pain waited a bit longer to see if Hari picked up on where he was going with this. He didn't. So, we are going to go to Sound and return some of the research, so the nice, unstable scientist will leave us alone and focus on other projects the nature of which I am happy to remain ignorant of. That means don't speculate, or tell me, Hari. Some of it? I don't want him to think we're caving completely. It would be bad for business and bad for his character. On an unrelated subject, he was most displeased about the removal of a test subject's nose. Oh, and the fact that you raided a secret base in a different country from Sound. Then he should have hidden it better. Personally, I thought it would have been more efficient to just not store Uchiha Sasuke there. I'd probably have ignored it, yes. Like I said. Back to the subject at hand, you will be going with me and your father. All right. Go gather some of the research and meet me at the... I really wish he would wait for me to finish orders. Hi, Uncle Toby. Hello, Hari. Toby turned back to the book on his desk. I'm not going to tell you again, you just aren't funny. But I told my best joke. Shouted the book. I will make you laugh if it costs you your soul, Mr. Toby. Uncle Toby? Toby didn't look away from the book this time. Can you come with me to Sound? Why? I'll find a better joke, Mr. Toby. You will laugh. The book fairly snarled. Uncle Pain wants me to go there with him, but I left before he told me where to meet him. No, I don't think so, Hari. Okay. How about this one? The book growled. 16 innocent little orphans were tied up on an altar. Toby is giving you to Haydn. Hey Dad. Yes? Do you know where we're supposed to meet Uncle Pain? Funnily enough, he did mention to me something about finding my son and taking him to the base of the tower. Oh good. I missed it when he told me. Because you walked out, yes. Come on. Hari, remember to be on your best B. Pain trailed off. You know something. Just stand still next to me and your father and don't do pretty much anything. As I live and breathe, called Orochimaru's voice from the ramparts of Sound. I do believe that it is Pain and the eldest Uchiha at my doorstep. Since I haven't done anything to antagonize you yet, might I ask why you're here? If you want to blow up my village, you could at least let me make your lives difficult first. Funny you should mention blowing up your village, Orochimaru, said Pain. I had strongly considered that option, but I have to weigh it against the danger that you wouldn't die, and I just know that you'd make more trouble like that than if I let you keep your village. You mean if I were avenging myself against you for wrecking much of what I've striven for? Yes, that's a fair assessment. Like I said. Still, it was tempting just to find out if you can die. No one has managed it yet. Yet indeed. But since you aren't here to blow up my place, what are you doing here? Are you in the market for some experiments to be performed on you? No, but a related reason. Hari here is going to return some of your research. Some? Uncle Pain said it's bad for your character if you get what you want, Hari offered. Pain sighed. Thank you, Hari. No problem, Uncle Pain. Hari held up a scroll. Here's most of the stuff I took last time I was here. What do you mean most? I kept the stuff on the prototype seal. You had done a bad job with it anyway, so I had to fix your work. You what? Well yeah. I got it working now though. Is that why you're full of nature chakra? If that's what it is, yes. He's full of what? Snapped Itachi. Then he paused. That would explain the gold skin and stuff. Huh, There's a thing. I'd be willing to give you your original notes for the prototype too, Snake Man. Orochimaru rubbed his forehead. What'll it cost me? Your tongue technique. My what? His what? Pain and Itachi added. He's got a thing he does where he gets his tongue all long and stuff. Pervert Sage said it'd be really useful, but that Snake Man never told him how to do it. Of all the things, all three men grumbled. Actually, you also need to throw in the neck extending thing too. Hari grinned. Hurry up before I remember anything else to add to the list. Fine. Orochimaru leapt down from the ramparts and stood in front of Hari. You've got the Sharingan, lucky bastard, so I'll just do this. He flew through a series of seals, twice. There you go. The rest is practice though. I can't teach you how to wield a weapon with it or anything this way, you'll need to just do it until you manage. Alright. Hari's neck had lengthened a bit and then retracted. Why did you want that one? Orochimaru asked, genuinely curious. Because Pervert Sage said you didn't share that one with him either. No, use for it? He didn't mention any. That is impressive, he came up with a way to use the technique of the fourths for sex. Yep. It works pretty nicely too. Itachi sighed, not needing to know this. And now we take our leave, Orochimaru. Please try not to kidnap my brother a third time. I didn't kidnap him last time. Orochimaru asserted. He showed up at the gates after your son kidnapped him. Nevertheless, I've done lots of bad things in my life and I plan to do plenty more, Orochimaru growled. But I didn't kidnap your brother. Either time. Keep telling yourself that, said Itachi airily, mimicking the mannerisms he'd encountered in Uchiha, and wasn't that weird, Naruto? He placed a hand on his son's shoulder and tugged him away from sound. Good day, Orochimaru, Pain said. Don't give me a reason to tell Deidara that Rice Country is his new test facility. Apros POS of nothing, Pain commented as they were walking down the road towards Rain. Hari, you are hereby banned from leaving the tower for destinations within the elemental nations without being escorted by me personally. All right, Uncle Pain. Haydn stumbled into the meeting room, his normally pale skin a waxy color that was disturbingly like sickened. In one trembling hand he clutched the joke book. His face was drawn, skin pulled tight over his skull. He looked like death warmed over. Take it back, he demanded in a quivering voice, holding the book out to Toby. Take it back, please. Toby cocked his head. What's wrong, Haydn? It talks to me. Make it stop. Haydn's free hand slammed down on the book's cover, his muscles visibly bulging, as he apparently strained to keep it shut. What's wrong, Haydn? Why don't you laugh? A gravely voice asked from somewhere in the room. Wasn't I funny enough? Haydn whimpered and flung the book at Toby. It's looking at me, Toby. Make it stop looking at me. He cried desperately. Toby's body language was more confused than anything. Toby does not understand. Toby doesn't think books can look at Haydn. Hello, Toby, growled the voice, a smell of sulfur filling the air. Time to make you laugh. The book sprang open and a fleshy thing with too many eyes began to rise from the pages. No! Screamed Haydn as he dove across the room, throwing himself bodily at the text. For the love of the gods, don't let it open. He landed heavily on the book and slammed a kunai through it, pinning it shut as it began to shudder violently in his grip. Come on, you little fleshlings! Bellowed the book, brimstone stench choking the room. Let me open. I'll make all of you laugh. What's the matter, Toby? Don't you find me funny? Greenish goo began to ooze from between the pages, dribbling down Haydn's fingers as the man began to burble helplessly. Toby, Pain, Conan, and Kakuza stared at the unfolding scene with a mix of revulsion and terror. Toby wants to know what Hari got Toby. Please Please, in the name of everything holy, mumbled Haydn. Help me stop it. He fell face down as Kakuzu's hand impacted the back of his head. He was going to snap, the man explained as he shot a series of earthen spears from his hand to hold the book shut. A long tentacle slithered out of the closed text, eyes searching. The very presence of the thing was making the S-class ninja in the room break out in cold sweats and humors to drip from their eyes and ears. Time for a joke, Toby. The gathered Akatsuki backed slowly away from the book as purplish flames began to lick its edges. Suddenly an orange blade pierced it. No. Screeched the voice of 1,000 damned souls. No, no, no. You can't seal me away forever, weaklings. I'll be back. One day I'll return to make you laugh. Phnglui mglw naf cth. The book was sucked into a swirl of color and vanished on the other side of the room in a jug of ethereal sake. Everyone stared at Itachi as he who helps beyond all means faded. The man still had his feet propped up on a desk and was turning a page in a book. He didn't look up as he spoke, it was disrupting my reading. Haydn's head rose, saw the book in Itachi's hands, emitted a horrible wail, and fell to the ground, foaming at the mouth. Great, muttered Kakuzu. Now we'll teach him to read. Pain and Toby were staring blankly at the spot where the book had been before being sucked into Itachi's He Who Helps Beyond All Means. They looked at each other. Toby is very disturbed by what Hari got him. You and me both. Toby thinks you should have a word with Hari. Please ask him not to get Toby more books. Toby is unsure if Toby would survive. I think I will. Has anyone seen Hari recently? Not in about a week, Leader-sama, said Itachi from the depths of his book. Pain froze. Icy terror clawed at his heart as he imagined the chaos that his nephew was no doubt unleashing on the world. He took a deep breath. No. He couldn't be out and about. I'm right here and he needed to be escorted by. He trailed off in horror. Where is my animal path? He asked suddenly. Pain had a vacant look on his face for a moment, then pants-shitting fear replaced it. Why is that Suchikage looking at me? Outtake. Hi, pansy. Hari leaned to the side to avoid the disembowelment curse from Mr. Parkinson. He kicked his foot out, sending a knife spinning through the air and stabbing into the man's wrist, pinning it to the wall. 10 feet behind him, dragging the unfortunate man along by a dislocated shoulder. Hari. You just appeared in a cloud of fire. Pansy had adapted rather well, all things considered. Given that Draco Malfoy was in the hospital wing often, she had needed to make friends with the people this crazy boy had forced on her. Even the mudblood had merit, if only because as much as she disliked admitting it, Granger was a bona fide genius. She wasn't used to this insanity by any stretch of the imagination, but she was better able to accept it. Besides, her parents weren't nice people, so she had no difficulty understanding someone capriciously making her do things she didn't want to. How else does one appear when using a phoenix to travel? Hari sounded genuinely mystified. I suppose you have a point there, she granted. But what in the hell are you doing here? She watched as her mother resisted the urge to curse her new not-quite-friend and instead went to help her husband, who was cursing a blue streak. I thought it would be good if I gave you your presents. You shouldn't have. Seriously. But I did. I'd hate it to go to waste. He pointed towards the door. They're outside on the lawn. Make sure you learn to use them or I'll train you. The words aren't terrifying, but somehow I am scared nevertheless. That's a healthy way to think. Your father uses some impressive words. I've never heard them from his mouth before. I guess I'm special? Something like that. Bye, pansy. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfictions. Looking forward to having you on board again.